school auditorium had never looked so beautiful. Rows of chairs stretched from one side of the room to the other. Fresh flowers decorated the stage, and bright lights shined down on the polished black piano waiting in the center. Teachers hurried around making sure everything was ready, while parents slowly filled the seats, smiling as they searched for their children. For many students, this was simply another school event. For one young girl, it was the moment she had dreamed about for years. She stood quietly behind the stage curtain, gently rubbing her hands together. They felt cold even though the room was warm. She was nervous, but not because she doubted herself. She simply wanted to do her best. She closed her eyes for a second and imagined the sound of the first piano note. That always helped calm her heart. Music had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. When she was little, there was no piano in her home. Her family could never afford one. Her father worked long hours repairing old machines, while her mother cleaned offices during the evenings. Money was always carefully counted before anything was bought. Even with those challenges, her parents never stopped encouraging her. Years earlier, she had discovered an old piano at the neighborhood community center. Many of the keys were worn, and a few made strange sounds, but to her it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. Every afternoon after school she would walk there carrying a backpack that seemed almost bigger than she was. She practiced until the center closed. Sometimes she stayed so late that one of the volunteers had to remind her it was time to go home. The volunteer often laughed and said, "If hard work made music, this room would already sound like a concert hall." She would smile quietly and promise to return the next day. And she always did. Her parents noticed how much she loved music. They could not buy expensive lessons, but they found small ways to help. Her father repaired an old wooden bench so she could sit comfortably while practicing. Her mother collected used music books from neighbors and libraries that were giving them away. Neither of them knew much about classical music, but they believed in their daughter. That belief became her greatest source of strength. As the years passed, her talent slowly became impossible to ignore. One music teacher at school noticed how quickly she learned difficult pieces. While other students struggled with complicated rhythms, she seemed to understand them naturally. The teacher never treated her like a child with impossible dreams. Instead, the teacher challenged her with harder songs every month. "You can do more," the teacher would often say. Those simple words stayed with her. Now she was in high school, and after years of practice, she had earned the chance to perform at the annual school music showcase. Students from every grade wanted a place in the program. Only a few were selected. When her name appeared on the final list, her parents celebrated with a homemade dinner. It wasn't expensive, but they laughed more than they had in weeks. Her father said, "We may not understand every note you play, but we'll be cheering louder than anyone." Her mother smiled and added, "Just play from your heart." Those words stayed with her as she waited behind the curtain. Across the hallway, another person was preparing for the evening. The school's principal had arrived earlier than everyone else. He walked through the auditorium with his hands behind his back, stopping often to inspect every detail. Several teachers greeted him politely. He barely smiled. Everyone knew he expected perfection. Over the past year, many students had noticed that he treated some children differently from others. His decisions often confused teachers, but few people questioned him openly. Whenever concerns were raised, he dismissed them as misunderstandings. Some staff members quietly shared stories with one another during lunch breaks. A student removed from a leadership role without explanation. Another overlooked for an award despite excellent grades. Parents had asked questions before, but clear answers never came. Still, nothing had ever happened in front of such a large audience. That evening, the principal held the performance schedule in his hands. When he reached the girl's name, his expression changed. He frowned slightly. One teacher noticed. "Everything all right?" the teacher asked. "I have concerns," the principal replied. "What kind of concerns?" "I don't believe she represents the image the school should present." The teacher looked surprised. "She's one of the strongest musicians we've ever had." The principal folded the paper. "That is your opinion." The conversation ended there. The teacher wanted to say more but looked around at the crowded hallway. Instead, the teacher quietly walked away. Behind the stage, the students lined up according to the program. Some practiced deep breathing. Others whispered encouraging words to each other. The girl remained calm. She gently touched the small silver pendant hanging around her neck. It had belonged to a family member who always encouraged her to keep believing in herself. Whenever she felt nervous, she held it for a moment. It reminded her why she played. Not for trophies, not for applause, but because music made her feel free. Soon the announcer stepped onto the stage. The audience applauded as the evening officially began. One by one, students performed. The choir sang beautifully. A violin group received loud applause. Several younger children performed short piano pieces that made everyone smile. Parents filled the room with cheers after every performance. Finally, the announcer looked toward the wings of the stage. "Our next performer has shown remarkable dedication to music," the announcer said warmly. "Please welcome our final piano soloist." The audience clapped. Her heart raced. She slowly walked onto the stage. The bright lights made it difficult to see individual faces, but she could hear familiar voices cheering from somewhere in the middle rows. She recognized her father's whistle. She smiled. Walking toward the piano felt almost unreal. Every practice session, every late afternoon, every sacrifice, every moment had led here. She adjusted the piano bench carefully. She took one deep breath. The entire auditorium became silent. Her fingers rested gently above the keys. Then the first note echoed through the room. It was soft, beautiful, confident. Within seconds, the audience was completely drawn into the music. Even people who knew nothing about piano could feel the emotion in every note. Teachers exchanged impressed glances. Parents smiled proudly. Students who had been whispering only moments earlier now listened without making a sound. The melody filled every corner of the auditorium. She forgot about the audience. She forgot about the lights. She simply played. Halfway through the performance, movement appeared near the front row. The principal slowly stood up. At first, most people assumed he was adjusting his seat. Instead, he walked toward the stage. Several teachers looked at one another with puzzled expressions. The music continued. The girl remained completely focused. She never noticed him climbing the steps. The audience began whispering quietly. "What is he doing? Is something wrong?" The principal continued walking until he reached the piano. For a brief second, he stood beside her without speaking. The music stopped as she looked up in confusion. The entire room fell silent. No one understood why the performance had been interrupted. The girl searched his face, waiting for an explanation. Instead, he spoke in a cold voice that carried across the auditorium. "This performance is over." She stared at him, unable to believe what she had heard. "I did something wrong?" she asked softly. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he reached toward her arm and firmly guided her away from the piano. Gasps spread across the audience. Parents immediately stood from their seats. Teachers froze in disbelief. The girl's eyes filled with confusion more than anger. She looked back at the piano she had spent years dreaming of playing on. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence inside the auditorium felt heavier than any music that had filled the room only moments before. And in the back of the auditorium, just as shocked whispers began spreading through the crowd, several unexpected visitors quietly stepped through the entrance doors, taking seats without drawing attention to themselves. For several long seconds, no one in the auditorium moved. The young girl stood beside the piano, still trying to understand what had just happened. She looked at the audience, then back at the instrument she had practiced so hard to play. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them folded together. She did not want anyone to see how hurt she felt. The principal stepped toward the front of the stage and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a calm voice, "there has been a change in tonight's program. We will move on to the next part of the event." His words only made the silence feel heavier. Parents looked at one another with confused expressions. Students whispered quietly. Teachers remained frozen, unsure of what to do next. Near the middle row, the girl's father slowly stood up. "She was in the middle of her performance," he said respectfully. "May I ask why it was stopped?" The principal looked toward him. "This decision was made in the best interest of the school." "Best interest?" the father asked. "She was simply playing the piano. There are matters that do not need to be discussed publicly," the principal replied before turning away. The answer satisfied no one. The girl's mother gently reached for her husband's arm and encouraged him to remain calm. She knew their daughter needed support, not a loud argument. Backstage, one of the music teachers quickly walked toward the girl. "You did nothing wrong," the teacher said softly. The girl looked down at the floor. "Then why did he stop me?" The teacher wished there were an easy answer. "I honestly don't know." Those words hurt almost as much as the interruption itself. The teacher handed her a bottle of water. "Take a few deep breaths." She nodded but could barely swallow. Her dream performance had lasted only a few minutes. For years she had imagined finishing the final note while her parents smiled from the audience. Instead, she was standing behind a curtain, wondering if everyone believed she had made some terrible mistake. Outside the stage area, conversations had already begun. "I've never seen anything like this. Did she break a rule?" "I don't think so. She was playing beautifully." Parents continued asking questions, but no one seemed to have an answer. Meanwhile, several audience members quietly checked the videos they had recorded on their phones. Many had started filming as soon as the piano performance began. Without realizing it, they had captured everything. The music, the principal walking onto the stage, the interruption, the confusion. One parent replayed the video several times. "There wasn't any problem," the parent whispered. Another nodded. The performance was going perfectly. A teacher standing nearby overheard them but said nothing. For months, many teachers had carried similar concerns. Some had noticed students being treated differently. Others had questioned unusual decisions. Yet every time concerns were raised, the conversations ended quickly. People worried about losing their jobs. People worried about creating conflict. So they stayed quiet. Tonight felt different. This had happened in front of hundreds of witnesses. Behind the stage curtain, the girl's piano teacher sat beside her. "Do you remember your first lesson?" the teacher asked with a gentle smile. The girl managed a small nod. "I couldn't even reach the pedals." The teacher laughed softly. "You were determined anyway." The memory brought the first small smile to her face. "You practiced longer than anyone else." "I wanted to get better." "And you did." The teacher paused before continuing. "I've taught music for many years." The girl looked up. "I've seen talented students." The teacher smiled warmly. "But very few have your patience." The girl remained quiet. "I feel like I disappointed everyone." The teacher immediately shook their head. "No. But I didn't even finish." "Sometimes," the teacher said, "life interrupts us before we're ready. That doesn't erase all the work we've done." The words stayed with her. She slowly looked toward the stage curtain. She could still hear the audience talking. Part of her wanted to leave the building. Another part wanted to sit back at the piano and finish what she had started. She simply didn't know if she would get the chance. At the front entrance of the auditorium, a small group quietly entered the building. Unlike the parents rushing toward the stage or students gathering in groups, these visitors walked calmly. One of the office staff greeted them. "We're glad you could make it." One member of the group smiled politely. "We arrived a little later than expected. You've missed part of the concert." Another member noticed the unusual atmosphere. "It seems something happened." The staff member hesitated. There was an interruption during the piano performance. "What kind of interruption?" The principal stopped one of the students in the middle of her performance. The visitors exchanged brief glances. None of them said another word. Instead, they quietly walked into the auditorium and found seats near the back. Most people were too distracted to notice them. The principal certainly did not. He remained near the stage, speaking confidently with several organizers. "The event must continue," he insisted. One organizer spoke carefully. Many parents are asking questions. They'll receive an explanation later. But the audience is upset. The program comes first. Although he sounded confident, he noticed something unusual. Teachers who normally agreed with him avoided eye contact. Several staff members gathered together, speaking in low voices. Even some students looked disappointed rather than confused. For the first time that evening, the principal realized people were no longer simply accepting his decisions without question. Backstage, another student was preparing to perform next. The student looked nervous. "I don't know if I can go out there now." The music teacher understood. The atmosphere had completely changed. This was supposed to be a joyful celebration. Instead, everyone felt uneasy. The teacher encouraged the student gently. "The audience is here for all of you." The performance continued, but the mood inside the auditorium was different. People applauded politely. Still, many eyes kept drifting toward the backstage curtain where the young pianist quietly sat. She listened to every performance without really hearing the music. Her thoughts kept returning to one question. Why? She had followed every instruction. She had practiced every day. She had respected every teacher. She had earned her place on that stage. Yet somehow she had been treated as though she did not belong there. Her parents finally reached the backstage area. The moment she saw them, she tried to smile. Instead, tears filled her eyes. Her mother wrapped her in a gentle hug. "You were wonderful. I didn't even finish. You didn't need to finish for us to be proud." Her father knelt beside her chair. "I heard every note you played." She looked at him. "You did. They were beautiful. I thought maybe—" He gently interrupted. "Never doubt your gift because someone else made a poor decision." Those words gave her a little strength. Not enough to erase the hurt, but enough to lift her head again. Back inside the auditorium, one of the visitors quietly asked an usher for the evening program. The usher handed it over. The visitor studied the printed schedule carefully. "The piano solo should still be happening," one of them observed. "It was stopped," the usher replied quietly. "For what reason?" "I'm afraid I don't know." The visitors exchanged another thoughtful glance. They remained silent, watching everything carefully. They noticed the worried parents. They noticed the uncomfortable teachers. They noticed the principal walking confidently through the room as though nothing unusual had happened. Most importantly, they noticed the atmosphere of fear that seemed to have settled over everyone. None of them made any announcement. None of them interrupted the event. They simply continued observing. The principal looked across the auditorium and finally spotted the small group sitting together near the back. His confident expression changed for just a moment. He recognized them immediately. Although they had entered quietly, their presence carried great importance. He straightened his jacket and forced a smile. He had not expected members of the school board to arrive while the evening was still unfolding. And suddenly, for the first time since walking onto the stage, he realized that every decision he had made that night might soon have to be explained. The principal stood perfectly still for a brief moment. His eyes remained fixed on the group seated near the back of the auditorium. They had arrived quietly without asking for attention, but he knew exactly who they were. Members of the school board. A few minutes earlier, he had been speaking with complete confidence. Now his thoughts began to race. He quickly walked toward them with a practiced smile. "I didn't know you would be attending tonight," he said politely. One of the board members smiled in return. "It was a last-minute decision. We're honored to have you here. We're happy to support our students," another member replied. The principal nodded. "I hope you're enjoying the performances." There was a short pause. "We noticed one performance ended unexpectedly." The principal cleared his throat. "There was a situation that required immediate action." "I see. We'll discuss it after the program," the principal added, hoping to move the conversation forward. The board members exchanged calm glances. "We would appreciate understanding what happened." "Of course," he answered. "After the event." They did not argue. Instead, they simply nodded. "We'll wait." The principal walked away, but the confidence he had shown earlier was fading. Meanwhile, backstage, The young pianist remained seated with her parents and music teacher. She listened as another student finished performing. The applause sounded warm, but it also reminded her of the moment she had lost. Her mother gently squeezed her hand. "You don't have to be strong every second." The girl looked down. "I keep thinking I must have done something wrong." "You didn't," her father answered immediately. "But everyone saw." "They saw something unfair," he said softly. "They did not see you fail." Those words stayed with her. Across the room, several parents had gathered together. One father held his phone in his hand. "I recorded almost everything." "So did I," another parent replied. "I don't understand why she was stopped." A teacher quietly joined the conversation. "I watched the performance from the side of the stage. Was there any problem?" "No. The music was beautiful." Another parent looked surprised. "Then why would anyone interrupt it?" The teacher hesitated. "I honestly don't know." The conversation continued growing as more parents joined. Everyone had the same question. Nobody had the same answer. Near the back of the auditorium, one school board member noticed the small group talking. Instead of interrupting, the member simply walked over. "Excuse me," the board member said kindly. "We've heard there was concern during the performance." One parent nodded. There certainly was. Several people offered to show the videos they had recorded. The board member accepted. One by one, short clips played across different phone screens. The same scene appeared every time. The girl sat peacefully at the piano. She played with confidence. The audience listened quietly. Then the principal walked onto the stage. He interrupted her. He guided her away from the piano before the piece had ended. There were no signs of disruption. No emergency. No safety concern. Only confusion. The board member thanked everyone. "Would you be willing to share these recordings if needed?" Every parent answered the same way. "Absolutely." Nearby, another board member spoke privately with one of the music teachers. "Can you tell me what happened?" The teacher took a slow breath. "The student earned her place fairly." "Did she violate any school rules?" "No." "Did she refuse instructions?" "Never." "Did she perform inappropriately?" "Not at all." The teacher looked around before speaking again. "She practiced harder than almost anyone." The board member listened carefully. "Has anything similar happened before?" The teacher remained silent for several seconds. Finally, the answer came. "Not exactly like this. But there have been moments when certain students seem to receive different treatment." "Were concerns reported?" "Some were." "What happened?" "They usually went nowhere." The board member wrote several notes. "Thank you for your honesty." Backstage, the girl stood near the curtain. She watched another piano student perform. Instead of feeling jealous, she smiled. Music still made her happy. Even after everything that had happened, her teacher noticed. "You still love playing?" She nodded. "I always will." The teacher smiled. "That's something no one can take away." A volunteer entered the backstage area. "The school board would like to speak with the music department after the program." Several teachers exchanged surprised looks. News spread quietly through the staff. People began realizing that tonight would not simply end with applause and everyone going home. Questions were finally being asked. The principal noticed the growing conversations. Wherever he walked, people stopped talking until he passed. He could feel the change. Earlier in the evening, everyone had followed his directions without question. Now people looked uncertain. Some even avoided him. One organizer approached carefully. "The board members have requested copies of the performance schedule. They can have it." They've also asked who approved the student performers. "I did." "And who removed the pianist?" "I did." The organizer gave a small nod and walked away. The principal suddenly realized how many decisions had his name attached to them. Each one would likely be examined. As the final group performance ended, the announcer returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said with a smile, "thank you for supporting our talented students this evening." Before the closing remarks could continue, one of the school board members stood. The room grew quiet. The board member walked calmly toward the stage. No one spoke. Parents watched closely. Teachers exchanged nervous glances. The principal forced another smile. He expected a few polite comments about the concert. Instead, the board member accepted the microphone. Before we conclude tonight's program, the member said warmly, "We would like to thank every student who prepared for this event." The audience applauded. The board member continued, "We understand that one performance was unexpectedly interrupted." The auditorium became silent again. The principal shifted uncomfortably. "We have spoken with several people," the board member continued, "but we believe the student deserves the opportunity to complete the performance she worked so hard to prepare." Soft whispers spread across the room. Parents looked at one another. Students smiled. The girl's eyes became wide with surprise. She looked toward her teacher. The teacher smiled gently. "I think they're talking about you." The board member looked toward the backstage curtain. "If the student feels comfortable returning to the piano, we would be honored to hear the complete performance." The entire auditorium erupted into applause. Some parents stood. Teachers smiled with relief. Students began clapping louder. The girl froze. She had imagined this moment many times, but now she wasn't sure she could do it. "What if I make a mistake?" she whispered. Her teacher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Everyone in that room already knows your courage. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to be yourself." Her father smiled proudly. "We came to hear you play." Her mother wiped away quiet tears. "We're still waiting." The applause continued. The board member remained standing patiently, giving her all the time she needed. Finally, the girl took a slow, steady breath. She nodded. "I'll finish." The music teacher smiled. "I knew you would." As she stepped toward the stage once more, something felt different. A few minutes earlier, she had walked onto the stage carrying only her own hopes. Now she carried the encouragement of an entire auditorium. People moved aside to let her pass. Students smiled at her. Teachers nodded proudly. Parents applauded as she walked by. Even those who had never met her felt connected to her quiet determination. She climbed the steps slowly. The lights once again shined across the polished piano. The audience gradually became silent. She adjusted the bench exactly as she had before. For just a second, she closed her eyes. The fear was still there. The hurt had not disappeared. But neither had her love for music. She rested her fingers gently above the keys. The auditorium became so quiet that even the smallest sound could be heard. Every eye remained fixed on the stage. And this time, no one intended to interrupt her. The room was so quiet that every small sound seemed louder than usual. The young girl rested her fingers lightly on the piano keys. She closed her eyes for just a moment and took a slow breath. Her heart was still beating fast. But this time she was not thinking about what had happened earlier. She was thinking about every afternoon she had spent practicing, every mistake she had corrected, and every person who had believed in her. When she opened her eyes again, she looked calm. Then she played the first note. It floated gently through the auditorium. The audience remained completely silent. No one wanted to miss a single moment. The second note followed, then the third, and soon the beautiful melody filled the room once again. This time there were no whispers, no movement, no distractions. Even the youngest children in the audience sat quietly, listening with full attention. The girl no longer noticed the bright stage lights. She no longer worried about the crowd or about the principal standing near the side of the stage. She simply let the music tell the story that words never could. Her hands moved smoothly across the keyboard. Every note sounded confident. Every pause felt meaningful. The piece was not the hardest one ever written, but she played it with such feeling that people could sense every emotion behind it. Some heard hope, some heard sadness, others heard courage. Near the front row, her father watched without taking his eyes off the stage. Earlier that evening he had felt helpless. Now he simply smiled. His daughter had found her confidence again. Beside him, her mother quietly wiped away a tear. It was not because she was sad. It was because she knew how much strength it had taken for her daughter to return to that piano after such an embarrassing moment. The music teacher stood near the curtain backstage. The teacher folded both hands together and smiled proudly. There had never been any doubt about the girl's talent. But tonight was about something much bigger than talent. It was about character. Several students watched from the wings of the stage. Some had competed with her for a place in the concert. Others had practiced beside her for months. At that moment, none of that mattered. They simply wanted her to succeed. The melody slowly became stronger. Her fingers moved with confidence she had not shown earlier. It was as though every encouraging word from the audience had given her new strength. Near the back of the auditorium, the school board members continued watching carefully. One of them quietly said, "She has remarkable focus." Another nodded. Especially after everything that happened. They were not only listening to the music. They were watching the reactions throughout the room. Parents were fully engaged. Teachers looked relieved. Students smiled proudly. The performance was bringing everyone together. Only one person seemed unable to relax. The principal stood near the side wall with his arms folded. His face remained serious. He looked around the auditorium and noticed something that made him uncomfortable. No one was paying attention to him anymore. Every eye was fixed on the student he had interrupted. The applause had not yet begun, but he could already feel the room changing. People were no longer thinking about authority. They were thinking about fairness. The melody reached its most powerful section. The girl's hands moved quickly over the piano keys. Months of practice showed in every movement. She never rushed. She never hesitated. She played exactly as she had practiced hundreds of times before. A small smile appeared on her face. For the first time that evening, she truly felt at peace. It no longer mattered that the performance had been interrupted earlier. She had another chance, and she was making the most of it. A little boy sitting with his parents leaned forward in his chair. "I want to learn piano someday," he whispered. His father smiled. "If you practice like she does, maybe you will." Nearby, another student quietly watched with admiration. "I didn't know music could make people feel like this." The student's grandmother smiled warmly. "The best music always does." As the performance continued, several audience members lowered their phones. At first they had been recording the event. Now they simply wanted to enjoy it. The moment felt too special to experience only through a screen. The girl reached the final section of the piece. She knew these last pages by heart. She had repeated them so many times that they almost felt like part of her. Every note came naturally. Every movement felt smooth. Her breathing stayed calm. The room remained silent, not because people were bored, because they were completely absorbed. Even the principal found himself listening. For a brief moment, the music seemed to erase every argument and every interruption from earlier. There was only the piano, only the performer, only the story carried through each note. Then came the final chord. It echoed gently through the auditorium. Her hands remained on the keys for one quiet second before slowly lifting away. Silence filled the room. No one moved. Then, almost at once, applause exploded throughout the auditorium. People stood to their feet. Parents clapped with wide smiles. Students cheered. Teachers applauded proudly. The standing ovation continued longer than anyone expected. The girl looked surprised. She had hoped people would enjoy the performance. She had never expected such overwhelming support. She stood from the piano bench and gave a small bow. The applause only became louder. Her parents stood with everyone else, clapping until their hands hurt. The music teacher smiled through tears of happiness. "You earned every second of this," the teacher whispered. The school board members also stood and applauded. One of them turned toward another and quietly said, "Her performance speaks for itself." The other nodded. "So does what happened before it." As the applause slowly settled, one board member walked calmly toward the stage once again. The audience gradually became quiet. The board member accepted the microphone. "Thank you," the member said warmly. "Tonight we witnessed not only a beautiful musical performance, but also remarkable courage." The audience applauded once more. The girl looked down modestly. She had never enjoyed being the center of attention. The board member continued, "Our schools should always encourage students to develop their talents in an environment of fairness, respect, and opportunity." Many parents nodded. Teachers listened carefully. Students watched quietly. The board member turned toward the young pianist. "Thank you for sharing your gift with all of us." She smiled and softly replied, "Thank you for giving me another chance." The simple words touched many people in the audience. They knew how difficult it must have been for her to return to the stage. As everyone prepared for the evening to end, the board members asked the principal to remain after the audience had left. The request was polite. It was also very clear. The principal gave a short nod. "I understand." Parents slowly gathered their belongings, but very few hurried toward the exits. Groups formed throughout the auditorium. People spoke quietly about the performance they had just witnessed. Many praised the young pianist's courage. Others discussed the importance of treating every student with fairness and respect. Several teachers thanked parents for supporting the students throughout the evening. Backstage, the girl finally allowed herself to relax. She looked at her teacher and smiled. "I finished." The teacher smiled back. "You did much more than finish." Her parents joined her with warm hugs. "We're proud of you," her father said. "No matter what happened tonight," her mother added, "you showed everyone who you really are." The girl looked once more toward the stage. Only a short time earlier, it had been the place where she felt embarrassed and confused. Now it had become the place where she had found her confidence again. As the last families slowly walked out of the auditorium, the school board members gathered quietly with the principal in a nearby meeting room. The smiles from the concert had faded. Folders were placed on the table. Several parents had already volunteered to share their recordings. Teachers had asked to provide statements. The board members thanked everyone for their patience and explained that they intended to carefully review everything before reaching any conclusions. The principal took a seat without saying much. For the first time that evening, he realized that the conversation ahead would be far more important than the one he had expected when the concert began. The concert hall slowly became quiet as families made their way toward the exits. Many people paused before leaving, looking back at the stage where the young pianist had just finished her unforgettable performance. The evening had started as an ordinary school music showcase, but it had become something no one would forget. Backstage, the girl carefully closed the cover of the piano and stepped away from the instrument. Her hands were no longer shaking. She felt tired, but a different kind of tired than before. Earlier, she had been carrying fear and confusion. Now she carried relief. Her parents walked toward her with warm smiles. Her father gave her a gentle hug. "You showed more courage tonight than most people show in a lifetime." She smiled quietly. "I was afraid I wouldn't be able to finish." "You almost didn't," her mother said softly. "But you chose to believe in yourself." The music teacher joined them. "I've watched hundreds of students perform over the years." The girl looked up. "I've seen perfect performances." The teacher smiled. "But very few performances have touched people the way yours did." The girl lowered her eyes. "I only wanted to play. And that's exactly why everyone connected with it." Across the hallway, members of the school board entered a meeting room beside the principal. Several senior teachers were also invited inside. The atmosphere was calm. No one raised their voice. No one rushed to judgment. One board member placed a folder on the table. "Before we begin," the member said, "our goal is to understand exactly what happened." Everyone nodded. The principal folded his hands together. "I believed I was acting in the school's best interest." Another board member looked at him. "Can you explain what led to your decision?" The principal hesitated. He spoke about maintaining standards and protecting the school's reputation. When he finished, the room became quiet. One teacher finally spoke. With respect, the student followed every instruction. Another teacher agreed. She earned her place through auditions. A third teacher added, her performance met every expectation. The board members listened carefully. They asked questions one at a time. Each answer was written down. There was no arguing, only careful discussion. Meanwhile, several parents waited outside the meeting room. They had volunteered to provide the videos they recorded during the performance. One parent stepped forward. "I believe this may help." The board members accepted the recordings with thanks. Another parent handed over photographs taken earlier that evening. Several audience members also offered written statements describing what they had witnessed. The board members appreciated the cooperation. "We want every voice to be heard," one member said. Hours passed as information was reviewed. Backstage, the girl sat quietly with her parents while waiting for news. She was not thinking about the meeting. Instead, she thought about how many people had supported her after she returned to the stage. Students she barely knew had congratulated her. Parents had stopped to encourage her. Even younger children had smiled as she walked by. Those simple acts of kindness stayed with her. Her music teacher sat beside her. "You know," the teacher said, "sometimes difficult moments reveal the best in people." The girl nodded. "I never expected everyone to support me. They supported your courage." The girl smiled gently. "I'll never forget tonight." The teacher looked at her. "I hope you also never forget something else." "What is that?" "You belong on every stage your hard work earns." Those words stayed in her heart. The next morning, the story spread throughout the school. Students talked about the concert before classes even began. Some discussed the piano performance. Others spoke about the standing ovation. Many simply admired how calmly the girl handled such a difficult situation. She walked through the hallway feeling nervous. She wondered whether people would stare. Instead, classmates smiled. Several wished her a good morning. One student stopped beside her. "I wanted to tell you something." She smiled politely. "Your performance inspired me." Another student joined the conversation. "I've always been scared to perform in front of people." The girl listened quietly. "But after watching you return to the piano, I think I'll try next time." She had never imagined her experience could encourage someone else. Throughout the day, teachers also offered kind words. One teacher said, "You showed great maturity." Another smiled. "Keep practicing." The support meant more than any trophy. Later that afternoon, the school board released a brief statement to school staff and families. The statement explained that they had begun a formal review of the events that occurred during the concert. They thanked parents, teachers, and students for their cooperation. They also emphasized the importance of treating every student with fairness, dignity, and respect. The statement did not assign blame. Instead, it promised a careful and complete review. Parents appreciated the thoughtful approach. Several days later, additional meetings took place. Teachers who had remained silent for a long time finally felt comfortable sharing their experiences. Some described situations where students had been treated inconsistently. Others suggested improvements that could make the school environment more welcoming for everyone. The discussions remained respectful. The focus stayed on learning and improving. The board members encouraged honest conversations. One member reminded everyone, "Strong schools are built when people are willing to listen." The principal also participated in those meetings. He answered questions and listened as others described their experiences. The process was not easy. It required patience from everyone involved. Outside the school, the local community also heard about the concert. A neighborhood music center invited the young pianist to perform at an upcoming community event celebrating student talent. When she received the invitation, she could hardly believe it. "I've never performed anywhere except school." Her teacher smiled. "Every musician starts somewhere." Her parents encouraged her to accept. "You've worked for this opportunity." She agreed. The community performance took place 2 weeks later. The room was much smaller than the school auditorium. There were no bright stage lights, no formal decorations, just a simple piano and people who loved music. This time, she walked to the piano without fear. She smiled as she greeted the audience. When she finished playing, people applauded warmly. Several children asked how long she had been practicing. She laughed. "For many years." One little girl looked up at her. "I want to play like you someday." The young pianist smiled kindly. "You can. You just have to keep practicing." The little girl nodded with excitement. Watching that conversation, Her parents exchanged proud smiles. They realized something important. Their daughter was no longer inspiring people only through her music. She was inspiring them through her kindness. As the weeks passed, the school board completed its review. They informed school staff that changes would be made to strengthen communication, improve student support, and reinforce fair procedures for school activities. The board also announced changes in school leadership, while the district continued implementing those improvements. Families welcomed the announcement. Teachers felt hopeful. Students noticed a different atmosphere around campus. The young pianist never celebrated anyone else's difficulties. When classmates asked how she felt, she answered honestly, "I just hope every student gets a fair chance." Her teacher smiled after hearing those words. That's the mark of real character. Near the end of the school term, the principal of another nearby school attended one of her community performances. Afterward, the principal introduced himself. "I've heard wonderful things about your dedication." The girl thanked him politely. "I'd like to invite you to perform at our regional student music festival next month." Her eyes widened. "Really? We believe young musicians should be encouraged whenever possible." She accepted the invitation with gratitude. As she walked home that evening with her parents, the sunset painted the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. Her father looked at her and smiled. "A few weeks ago, you thought one interrupted performance had ended your dream." She nodded. "I remember." He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes a closed door leads to a path we never expected." She looked ahead with a quiet smile. For the first time in many days, she wasn't thinking about the moment her music had been interrupted. She was thinking about the new stages waiting for her, the new songs she would learn, and the many people she hoped to encourage simply by sitting down at a piano and letting the music speak for itself. Several months passed, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The memory of the school concert was still fresh in many people's minds, but the pain that came with it had begun to fade. What remained was something much stronger. People remembered the courage of one young pianist who refused to let a difficult moment define her future. The school itself also felt different. Teachers greeted students with warmer smiles. New ideas were introduced to help every student feel welcomed and respected. School leaders held meetings with teachers, parents, and students to hear their thoughts about creating an environment where everyone had an equal chance to learn and grow. The changes did not happen overnight. They happened one conversation at a time. One small improvement led to another. Parents noticed the difference. Students noticed it even more. The young pianist continued practicing every afternoon. Her schedule had become busier than ever. Along with homework and family responsibilities, she now spent several hours each week preparing for the regional youth music festival. The invitation still felt unreal. Sometimes she looked at the invitation card sitting on her desk just to remind herself that it was real. Her mother walked into her room one evening and found her practicing the same section again and again. "You've played that part at least 10 times. The girl laughed. "I know. It already sounds beautiful. I think it can sound even better." Her mother smiled. "That's what makes you who you are." Her father returned home from work a little later carrying a small package. "I found something for you." She carefully opened it. Inside was a notebook with a plain blue cover. "It's for your music," he said. She looked at him with surprise. "My music? You always write little ideas on scraps of paper." She laughed. "I do. Now you have one place to keep them." She hugged him tightly. It was a simple gift, but it meant the world to her. That evening she wrote something on the first page. "Never stop playing because of one difficult moment." She looked at the sentence for a long time before closing the notebook. A few weeks later, the day of the regional music festival finally arrived. The event was held in a beautiful performing arts center, much larger than her school auditorium. Young musicians from many different schools had traveled there. Some carried violins. Others brought flutes, guitars, or cellos. Everyone looked excited and nervous at the same time. She quietly sat near the piano rehearsal room waiting for her turn. A younger participant noticed her. "Aren't you the student from the concert everyone talked about?" She smiled politely. I played at my school's showcase. I watched a video of your performance. The girl looked surprised. You did. It inspired me. The younger student hesitated before speaking again. I get scared before every performance. She smiled warmly. So do I. You do. Every single time. The younger student laughed. I thought confident people never get nervous. They do. The difference is that they keep going anyway. Those words stayed with the younger student. Soon it was time for the performances to begin. Families filled the audience. Music teachers sat together near the front. Judges quietly reviewed their notes while waiting for the first performers. When her name was announced, she walked calmly toward the piano. This time, there was no fear in her heart, only gratitude. She adjusted the piano bench, took one deep breath, and began to play. The hall became silent. Every note flowed naturally. She no longer played to prove anyone wrong. She played because she loved music. That simple difference changed everything. The audience could feel it. Her performance was filled with warmth, confidence, and joy. When she reached the final note, the room erupted into applause. People stood to their feet. The judges smiled appreciatively. Several young musicians waiting backstage applauded as well. She bowed with a grateful smile before leaving the stage. Her parents were waiting near the hallway. Her father hugged her proudly. No matter what happens today, you've already won. She smiled. I feel like I did. Later that afternoon, awards were announced. She received a special recognition for musical expression and perseverance. When her name was called, she walked to the stage once again. The presenter handed her the certificate and smiled. This award recognizes not only talent but also determination. She accepted it with both hands. Thank you. The applause felt wonderful, but what mattered most to her was knowing how far she had come. After the ceremony, many students approached her. Some asked about practicing. Others asked how she stayed calm during performances. She answered every question with kindness. There isn't a secret. You just keep learning. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. One student smiled. I think I needed to hear that. As the festival ended, her music teacher stood beside her outside the building. I have something to tell you. What is it? The teacher smiled proudly. The Community Music Center wants you to help mentor younger piano students on weekends. She looked surprised. Me? They believe you'll encourage them. She thought about the little girl who had once asked if she could learn piano. She remembered the younger student who admitted being nervous before performing. She smiled. I'd love to help. A few months later, the weekend classes became one of her favorite activities. Every Saturday morning, children gathered around the old piano at the community center where she had first learned to play. The instrument was the same one she had practiced on years ago. His keys still showed signs of age. A few notes still sounded slightly different. To her, it was perfect. One little boy struggled through a simple melody and sighed with frustration. I can't do it. She smiled. Can I tell you something? He nodded. I couldn't play it the first time either. You couldn't? No. So how did you learn? I kept coming back. The boy looked at the piano again. I'll try one more time. She smiled. That's all anyone can ask. Week after week, more children joined the classes. Parents noticed how patient she was. She never rushed anyone. She celebrated every small improvement. Sometimes a child learned one new chord. Sometimes someone finally finished a song they had been practicing for weeks. Every success mattered. Toward the end of the school year, the district organized a special student celebration recognizing achievements in academics, arts, athletics, and community service. The young pianist received an invitation. She attended with her parents and music teacher. During the ceremony, one district leader spoke about the importance of resilience. We often remember people for their greatest achievements, the speaker said, but sometimes their greatest achievement is refusing to give up. The audience applauded. When the young pianist's name was announced, she walked to the stage once more. She accepted a certificate recognizing her dedication to music and her positive influence on other students. The applause filled the room. Looking into the audience, she saw her parents smiling with pride. Her teacher wiped away a quiet tear. Several younger music students cheered loudly from their seats. She realized something important. Months earlier, she had believed one painful moment might become the story of her life. Instead, it had become only one chapter. The real story was everything that came afterward. Her courage, her kindness, her willingness to keep going. That evening, after the ceremony ended, she returned to the community center one last time before heading home. The building was quiet. She sat alone at the familiar old piano. Sunlight from the setting sun streamed through the windows. She placed her hands on the keys and played the same piece she had performed at the school concert. This time there was no audience, no applause, no judges, no cameras, just music. She smiled as the final note faded into the quiet room. She gently closed the piano lid and picked up her blue notebook. On the last page, she wrote one more sentence. Talent may open a door, but courage keeps you walking through it. She closed the notebook and looked around the room where her dream had first begun. The future was still unwritten. There would be new challenges, new performances, new lessons to learn, but she no longer feared any of them. She had learned that kindness is stronger than bitterness, that steady effort is more powerful than doubt, and that the people who truly believe in you can help you find your way again when life suddenly changes course. With a grateful heart and quiet confidence, she stepped outside into the evening light, ready for every new song that tomorrow would bring.